wind on the Chiricahua Pass never stopped blowing until today. Silence descended abruptly, like a death sentence. Taza pressed his hand tightly against his left side. Warm blood seeped through the gaps between his fingers, dripping crimson onto the pristine white snow. But death wasn't what darkened the Apache warrior's eyes. Beneath his deerskin boots, a mark of iron-studded spikes had crushed the stone symbol, the sacred boundary of the tribe's winter hunting grounds. The white enemy had trampled on forbidden land with guns and bullets. The law had been broken. The illusion of a safe winter had been officially snatched away. From the canyon below, the frantic barking of bloodthirsty hunting dogs echoed. Taza recoiled. His blood splattered on the snow, forming a death map leading straight to the Apache camp. He was forced to make a choice from which there was no turning back. To fall here, buried under the ice and snow to protect the lives of his people, or to crawl another half-mile toward the flickering fire emanating from a solitary wooden house in the cold pine forest. Inside that house was Tess. A woman of foreign descent pointed a rifle at the pitch-black night, her trembling breath fading against the window pane. She fled her past to the very depths of the wilderness to cling to her last remaining home, unaware that tonight a historical enemy was knocking at her door. The land's bravest warrior was falling and needed saving, and the woman considered weakest and most alone was about to hold the power of fate over his life. The screeching of hounds grew closer, sharp and piercing the night. Taza released her grip on her wound, staggering across the forbidden boundary. A long trail of blood stretched across the snow, heading straight towards the light. This sacred land had remembered what was buried, and Tess's decaying wooden door was about to open to an irreversible storm. Inside the wooden house, the air was thick with the stench of blood and silent terror. Taza collapsed on the tattered fur rug by the fireplace, his breath ragged and broken, rhythmically pulsating with pain. The bullet wound in his left side continued to bleed, staining a large area of the cold wooden floor red. The proud warrior of the Chiricahua tribe, once a haunting specter for patrols, now lay helpless. The pride of a wild man had been completely stripped away. His life was now as fragile as ashes, entirely dependent on the decision of a white woman. Not far from him, Tess stood completely hidden in the shadows. Her hands, calloused from months of solitary survival, gripped the loaded Winchester pistol. The cold muzzle pointed directly at the chest of the uninvited guest. Silence weighed heavily on every crack in the house. Not a plea, not a pleading glance. Taza squeezed his eyes shut, biting his lip to swallow back a groan, using his last ounce of strength to maintain absolute silence. Tess stared at him. In her eyes was a fierce struggle between instinctive fear and the raw empathy of a human being pushed to the brink. But the price was clear. This home, her last safe haven, was forever tainted. Suddenly, the howling of the blizzard was torn apart. The hounds howled savagely, their claws tearing at the doorstep. Clop, clop, clop. Footsteps pounded like iron nails on the rotting wooden steps. "Open the door! We know that dog ran this way." The mercenary leader's hoarse voice, filled with murderous intent, pierced through the thin wooden planks. 3 knocks echoed against the walls, shaking the flickering fire in the fireplace. Tess held her breath. The blade of choice pressed against her throat. Hand over this dying Apache in exchange for false peace, or lie to the bloodthirsty guns outside, conceal a historical enemy, and ignite her own destruction. Taza's eyes snapped open, his dark gaze fixed on her, silently awaiting judgment. Tess's lips tightened. She slowly lowered the gun, concealing it behind her thick skirt. Her other hand reached out, grasping the cold iron doorknob. The hinges creaked dryly. The door swung open, the wind and snow rushing in along with blazing torches, officially engulfing the surface of peace. The flickering torchlight licked the angular, scarred face of the mercenary leader. The howling wind rushed through the open doorway, whipping icy snowflakes against Tess's pale face. Beneath the rotting wooden floorboards where she stood, Taza lay huddled in the cramped turnip cellar, her breath stifled, her chest aching. Outside, just 10 yards from the windowsill, hidden among the snow-laden pine branches, was Chato. The 12-year-old scout of the Chiricahua tribe was like a ghost, his dark eyes unblinking, taking in every movement of his enemy. He was a witness, not interfering, only remembering. "We're looking for a stray Apache dog that just took a bullet."
The leader snarled, his hawk-like eyes sweeping across the impoverished room, glancing over the barrel of Tess's rifle hidden beneath her skirt.
Tess lowered her eyes, shrinking back, putting on the perfect facade of a weak, terrified widow. But her heart pounded when the soldier suddenly bent down. His rough hand, encased in a tattered leather glove, picked up a piece of fresh, blood-soaked deerskin, something that had been caught on the doorframe. The air in the room froze. His gaze slowly rose, shifting from the blood-stained skin to Tess's face, carrying a sharp, razor-sharp suspicion. The purity of this house was officially tainted. The soldiers had implicitly placed a death sentence on her, harboring a rebel. In the dark cellar, Taza tightened his grip on the knife with his last ounce of strength. His warrior instinct screamed at him to tear through the floorboards, to rush forward and finish off the enemy, to preserve his honor. But if he swung his knife, this strange white woman would instantly be buried alongside him. A cruel choice loomed: to live a life of humiliation in the shadows, letting a woman bear the brunt of the axe in his place, or to choose a glorious death but send her to her demise. Taza's knife slowly lowered. He closed his eyes, gritting his teeth and swallowing the pride of a leader. Above, the leader threw a piece of leather into the fire, spitting onto the wooden floor. "We'll search the forest. If you're hiding anything." He didn't finish his sentence. Instead, he drew the dagger from his side and carved a deep, cruel, diagonal line into the pillar in front of Tess's house. The soldiers left, disappearing into the snowstorm. But the blood-soaked cross on the wooden pillar roared an undeniable message. They would surely return. Darkness thickened in the wooden house, only the crackling of the pine wood revealing a stark reality. Taza had emerged from the dark cellar. The warrior's face was drenched in cold sweat, but his eyes were still sharp as knives. He heated the dagger over the flame, then, without blinking, pressed it straight into the bleeding wound. The sizzling sound of burning flesh rose. Taza bit off a piece of wood, suppressing the screams in his throat. Beside him, Tess didn't flinch or turn away. Her calloused hands decisively tore the hem of her felt dress, wrapping it tightly around the foreign man's side to stop the bleeding. There was no comfort, no romantic touch. The bond between them had blossomed from sharing profound pain, silent, heavy, and harsh, like the storm outside. But that rare silence was quickly shattered. Thump! An object flew through the window crack, embedding itself deep into the wooden floor beneath Taza's feet. A blunt-tipped arrow. Beyond the thick black snow, Chato's figure vanished, leaving behind the tribe's cold judgment. Taza's eyes darkened. The truncated arrow, a permanent mark for the dead or the traitor. By hiding beneath the floorboards of his white enemy, he had been officially erased from his own people's memory, defiling their sacred law. At the same time, Tess realized she too had become a traitor to her own kind. From the foot of the pass, the howling of the hunting dogs resumed, more frenzied and bloodthirsty than ever. The mercenaries had sensed the deception. The bloody cross on the windowsill was calling them back. Two outcasts were now forced into a cruel choice. To rush out into the blizzard meant certain death by freezing to death, or to remain inside this house only to be torn apart in an inevitable massacre. Before they could choose, reality knocked. Smash! A blazing torch shattered the window pane, its murderous aura rushing straight into the room. The greedy flames instantly devoured the dry curtains. The roof, their last safe haven, began to burn fiercely in the eye of the storm. The raging fire consumed the wooden roof, tearing through the swirling snow with its deadly light. Tess turned for one last look. The only legacy of the past, the safe haven she had fought for with blood and tears, was now nothing but scattered ashes carried away by the storm. There was no longer any hope for peace, no room for weakness. Now, the only thing that controlled them was their raw survival instinct. Leaving behind the blazing ruins, Tess and Taza retreated into the darkness of the canyon. Taza staggered forward. The freshly burned bullet wound oozed blood, staining the charred bandage with dark streaks. Tess walked close beside him, her numb hand gripping the rifle against her chest, her dry eyes scanning the rocky crevices. Behind them, not far away, amidst the howling wind, came the sound of snow being crushed underfoot. The footprints of dozens of mercenaries were relentlessly pursuing them, precise and patient, like a pack of hungry wolves sniffing out death. The only way to keep them from freezing tonight was straight toward the hot springs, the Chiricahua tribe's top secret winter survival spot. But with each step forward, Taza was walking barefoot on the blade of judgment. A cruel choice choked the warrior's chest. Changing course, accepting to be bait to lure the mercenaries away, meant both he and this woman would freeze to death in the snow and ice. Should they continue towards the camp to warn them, gambling with the danger of leading the enemy into their own brethren's sanctuary? Taza gritted his teeth. Though he bore the stigma of being a traitor, his blood was still Apache blood. They clung to the slippery cliff face, climbing to the top of a protruding rock, gazing down into the hazy valley below. But Taza's warning came too late. Down in the valley, campfires were being hastily extinguished by the falling snow. Shadows moved swiftly, dismantling tents in a deathly silence. The community knew the enemy was coming, and they were preparing to retreat, leaving behind a cold, desolate boundary that would forever separate the guilty from the sacred land. At the edge of the hastily dismantled Apache camp, the cold didn't come from the blizzard, but from the silent, lifeless eyes. Taza and Tess stood before the elder, his face etched with the wrinkles of 1,000 years of harsh survival. Amidst the silent crowd, the scout boy Chato huddled behind a withered pine tree, his dark eyes witnessing the final moment of judgment. There was no anger or hatred in the elder's eyes as they looked at Tess. They were not judging. They saw only an outsider, a seed of death that the tribe had to eradicate to preserve the lives of the women and children. Boom! A deafening gunshot rang out from the other side of the hill, shattering a large chunk of ice on the precarious cliff face. The mercenaries were accelerating. The murderous aura of their guns and bayonets was less than half an hour's drive from the camp. The elder raised his withered hand, issuing a cold, absolute command. Taza was allowed to return to the ranks, redeemed as a warrior, but with one condition. The white woman had to be bound here, a bloody bait to hold back the enemy, buying time for the tribe to retreat. Tess lowered her eyes, her chest tightening as she realized her very existence had become a death sentence. Amidst the howling of hounds demanding her life, Taza stood before the cruelest crossroads of his life. Choose life and his bloodline, or keep the woman who had burned down her last refuge for him. No justification, without a moment's hesitation, Taza slowly raised his hand to his neck, snapping the string that held the sacred memento of a leader. He placed it in the elder's palm, a public act of defiance of the order to retreat, a self-inflicted shattering of his own Apache identity. Then, with blood-stained hands, he reached out and intertwined his fingers with Tess's trembling ones. The elder turned. The entire Chiricahua tribe silently vanished into the swirling snow and mist like ghosts. No one looking back. No more shelter, no way out. Only two exiles standing alone before the storm of death. Leaving the world behind, Taza and Tess retreated deep into a narrow, precarious gorge where jagged cliffs pierced the gray sky. Taza's blood-stained hands swiftly stuffed the last pinches of gunpowder into the crevices beneath the massive rock clinging to the abyss. Atop the towering cliff, shrouded in snow and mist, the young scout Shadow had secretly hidden. The child's eyes, unblinking, were fixed on the two solitary figures digging their own graves below, the sole witnesses to a fading legacy. There was no longer any trace of fear in the eyes of the white woman and the exiled warrior. The terror of being hunted had evaporated, giving way to the chilling silence of those who had accepted the price of their choice. Each trap set, each bullet Tess loaded into the magazine drained away the last vestiges of their strength and hope for survival. The wind suddenly ceased its howling. Instead, there was the screeching of dozens of iron-studded boots crushing the thin ice. Click, click. The sound of hammers cocking rifles echoed against the narrow walls, reverberating like a death knell. More than 20 shadowy figures armed with guns loomed large from the thick, swirling snow and mist, radiating a palpable aura of murderous intent and brutality. Once again, death laid out its cruel game. Should he retreat deeper into the cave behind him to prolong his dying breath for a few more minutes, then slowly suffocate and be burned to death by the enemy's smoke and fire? Or should he stand tall at the exposed throat of the canyon, stopping the bloodthirsty onslaught of more than 20 men, sacrificing his life to buy time for his tribe to retreat safely? Taza drew out his chipped dagger, standing firm like a blood-stained rock, using his own body to shield half the path. Behind him, Tess rested the butt of her Winchester rifle on her shoulder, the cold barrel aimed directly at the leading figure. No shouts, no farewells. Her numb finger decisively squeezed the trigger. Bang! The bullet ripped through the snow, piercing the mercenary's chest and sending him tumbling backward onto the cold rock. The gratuitous massacre at Chiricahua Canyon officially begins. There is no mercy, no glory in the death funnel of the narrow canyon. Thick, acrid gunpowder smoke mingles with the smell of fresh blood, sweat, and the rusty clang of metal pieces colliding frantically. The guns are out of ammunition. The massacre has turned into a wild, primal, close-quarters battle where humans tear each other apart with the most raw instinct for survival. The sound of bones shattering under the rifle butt, the choked growls and throats gushing blood. Tess retreated. Her Winchester broke in two with a single swing of her enemy's arm. She drew her small hunting knife, but it was too late. Thud! A sharp slash came down, slicing through her left shoulder. Blood gushed out, staining the snow beneath her feet. The wound left a permanent scar, depriving the woman of her last intact body. Not far from her, Taza was completely exhausted. The warrior's dagger was chipped and shattered. The mercenary leader lunged forward, cornering him against the icy cliff. With a cruel look in his eyes, he slammed the butt of his rifle into the necrotic wound in Taza's left side. The pain ripped through his soul, taking away the breath and sight of the exiled leader. But in that fleeting moment of fading consciousness, through the blood that streamed down his eyelids, Taza saw the leader draw his bayonet, his murderous gaze fixed on Tess, who lay collapsed in the snow. The final choice lay between life and death. To cower and endure, clinging to his fragile life to save himself and watch the woman be pierced through the chest. Or to use his mortal body as a shield, paying an eternal price to preserve his last remaining shred of humanity. Taza let out a guttural roar. He lunged forward, extending his bare left arm to meet the bayonet that was plunging straight down into Tess's body. The horrifying sound of steel crushing bone echoed. His left arm was pierced, tendon severed, leaving him permanently disabled. But in return, his remaining right arm, using its last ounce of strength, plunged the broken blade deep into the leader's throat. Hot blood gushed out like a fountain, splashing onto Taza's face. Two colossal figures collapsed into the thick red snow, motionless, buried amidst the howling wind, without a trace of mercy. The Chiricahua Gorge fell into a chilling silence. A silence that only appears when death has satiated with blood and flesh. The storm suddenly ceased its howling, leaving behind a space thick with the stench of decay and scattered corpses on the crimson snow. From the precipitous cliff, the scout boy Chato slowly climbed down. The small feet of the Apache child stepped over the lifeless corpses. Without a sound, without a trace of horror, he approached the largest pool of blood, silently bending down to look at the two figures clinging to each other, barely alive. Utter emptiness enveloped Taza and Tess. They survived. More than 20 mercenaries were killed, but no triumphant cry was heard. Victory and loss came in unison, mercilessly tearing apart everything that belonged to the past. Taza leaned against the cliff, his chest rising and falling weakly. His left arm hung limply, its tendons severed, forever crippled. The once proud warrior had lost his greatest weapon, and forever lost the right to set foot in the sacred land of his tribe. Beside him, Tess bit her lip, clutching her torn shoulder. The deep gash etched into her flesh was an indelible pain. The identity of an ordinary white woman was dead, leaving behind an exile bearing the mark of violence and abandonment. And the nightmare still refused to let go. The sub-zero cold began to seep into their open wounds, slowly freezing the flowing blood. With each passing second, the cold cruelly lulled their consciousness to sleep. If they didn't move, they would both become eternal ice statues in less than an hour. A silent choice lay between life and death: to surrender, to close their eyes and let the gentle chill lull them into eternal sleep, ending all their torment. Or should they use their last ounce of strength to crawl back to their feet, to continue living a life of disability, abandoned by both worlds? Chato stood there, his dark eyes witnessing the moment of judgment. Beneath the red snow, Taza's blood-stained, trembling hand slowly reached out, seeking and intertwining with Tess's icy fingers. They picked up a broken pine branch as crutches, leaning on each other's shoulders, gritting their teeth against the weight of death to slowly stand upright. They chose to live, even if the price of life was a bloody journey with no return. The gray dawn cast weak rays into a shallow cave, where two tattered shadows had just crawled across the line of death. Outside, the storm still howled, lashing icy snow against the rock walls. The harshness of wild nature remained undiminished. No sins were cleansed, no reality was reset. Taza knelt on the cold ground, his breath heavy, ragged, and broken in the frost. His left arm hung limply, blood-soaked and lifeless. But his right hand slowly reached up, touching the cold ashes mixed with dried blood on the cliff face. With absolute stillness, he wiped a streak of red ash from Tess's forehead. The Apache man's cracked lips moved, uttering the hoarse, choked syllables of an ancient healing song. But the song suddenly broke off. The sound died in his chest. Taza was no longer the leader. His plea no longer carried the power of the tribe. The sacred ritual ended in bitterness and incompleteness. Tess didn't cry. She gently lowered her eyes, moved closer, and rested her head against his chest, where his heart was faintly beating beneath his tattered leather jacket. Between two fractured souls, there was no room for apologies, no need for judgment of right or wrong, or any acknowledgement. The price for their freedom and lives was eternal separation. They would forever be wandering ghosts, bearing the rejection of both worlds. There were no more choices to consider. Now, only the naked struggle for survival remained, relying on the warmth of their bleeding wounds. Not far away, in the Death Gorge, the scout boy Chato slowly picked up 3 small stones and stacked them in the middle of the blood-soaked path, a silent sign of the Apache, acknowledging the souls who had fallen and were no longer part of this land. The child turned her back, her small figure slowly fading into the swirling white snow and mist, without a single glance back. Inside the dark cave, Tess and Taza were enveloped in shadows, clinging tightly to each other. No one spoke. Only the wild, howling wind remained, enveloping an incomplete yet eternally unchangeable ending. Thank you for accompanying us to the final, silent moments of the Chiricahua snow-covered mountains. There were no fairy tale miracles, only the power of survival and the brutal price of freedom. If this bloody yet resilient journey resonates with you, please like and subscribe to our channel. Your support is the fire that warms us, helping us continue to tell untold stories of the Wild West. Goodbye, and see you again.